They lasted less than 90 seconds. That was the interval between the moment Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps fast boats accelerated in swarm formation against a United States Navy combat group in the Strait of Hormuz and the moment the last fiberglass hulls stopped burning on the surface of the Persian Gulf. Less than 90 seconds, the time an average commuter takes to ride an escalator out of a subway station, to turn what Tehran had trained for 2 decades as its ultimate naval weapon into wreckage drifting under the Gulf sun. The numbers that emerged in the hours that followed measured the scale of the Iranian disaster with a precision the regime could not contest. According to reports attributed to United States Central Command, at least 7 Zulfiqar-class fast attack boats, vessels approximately 13 meters in length, capable of reaching 50 knots and armed with rockets and explosive charges, were neutralized before crossing the 800-meter mark of the American Naval Group's defensive perimeter. 7 destroyed vessels represent, according to estimates from the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, approximately 15% of the Revolutionary Guard's operational fast attack boat fleet in the Persian Gulf, a significant slice of an arsenal built over 3 decades of investment in asymmetric naval warfare. And here was the paradox that transformed this incident into something far larger than a 90-second tactical skirmish. The entire Revolutionary Guard doctrine in the Persian Gulf had been designed precisely for this type of attack. Suicide boats and swarm formation armed speedboats were the centerpiece of Iran's plan to deny any foreign navy control of the Strait of Hormuz. The regime had invested, according to estimates compiled by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, roughly $2 billion over 20 years in developing that capability, the equivalent of building a single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer for the United States Navy. $2 billion and 2 decades of training had been put to the test under real combat conditions, and they had failed in under 2 minutes. But the true impact of this operation extended far beyond the battlefield numbers. To understand what those 90 seconds revealed, you have to go back to the year 2002, when a retired United States Marine Corps general named Paul Van Riper took part in a military exercise known as Millennium Challenge. Van Riper, a Vietnam veteran with a reputation as a heterodox thinker and close-cropped white hair, commanded the Red Force, the simulated enemy side, and used exactly the tactic the Revolutionary Guard attempted in the Strait of Hormuz. A swarm of small, cheap, fast boats launched simultaneously against American warships. In the 2002 exercise, Van Riper virtually sank 16 American ships, including an aircraft carrier, within minutes. The Pentagon was so alarmed, it restarted the exercise and changed the rules. Van Riper is not the emotional protagonist of this analysis. He is the investigative coordinate that reveals how much the United States Navy invested in the 24 years that followed to ensure the Millennium Challenge scenario would never materialize in reality. And here was the data that conventional reporting was not displaying with the frequency it deserved. The system that intercepted the Iranian boats before they reached the lethal perimeter was not a $1.5 million cruise missile or an $800,000 torpedo. It was a combination of Mk-38 autocannons, high-rate weapons systems capable of firing 180 rounds per minute with an effective range of approximately 4 kilometers, and phalanx close-in weapon systems originally designed to intercept anti-ship missiles and adapted to neutralize high-speed surface threats. The cost of each burst that destroyed a $300,000 Iranian boat was estimated at less than $5,000 in ammunition. The equation had changed. Consider what that number represents in practice. For 2 decades, Iran's strategic premise in the Persian Gulf rested on a cost asymmetry that seemed mathematically unbeatable: $300,000 boats against $2 billion ships. Even if 90% of the boats were destroyed, all it took was 10% reaching their target to inflict catastrophic damage on a warship whose replacement would take years and cost the equivalent of the annual defense budget of countries like Portugal or Colombia. That was the logic, that was the bet, and in 90 seconds, the American response demonstrated that the cost asymmetry had inverted. Attacking was no longer cheaper than defending. The era of cheap and feared attacks was closed forever. The era of cheap, intelligent, and lethal defense officially began. Step back for a moment and look at the full picture. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely a shipping lane, it is an artery. The narrowest point is approximately 39 kilometers wide. But the navigable channels for supertankers reduce that functional passage to just over 6 kilometers in each direction. Through that bottleneck pass daily, according to data from the United States Energy Information Administration, approximately 21 million barrels of oil, the equivalent of roughly 21% of total global oil consumption. Every hour of instability in the strait adds a risk premium to the Brent barrel that can range between $3 and $8, depending on the perceived severity of the incident. The 90-second confrontation, according to commodity market analysts consulted by Reuters, temporarily added a premium of $5.70 per barrel, which, multiplied by the daily transit volume, represented a theoretical wealth transfer of approximately $120 million in a single day, from importing countries to exporting countries not dependent on Hormuz. In the shadow of this monumental strategic miscalculation, one actor was watching it all with calculated satisfaction. And here was the player the headlines were not mentioning with the frequency the data deserved: Saudi Arabia. Riyadh had invested over the past 5 years more than $4 billion in expanding the capacity of the East-West pipeline, which connects Saudi Arabia's eastern oil fields to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Every time Iran threatens Hormuz, every time a Revolutionary Guard speedboat accelerates against a warship, the Saudi argument for Asian buyers, Japan, South Korea, India, China, to pay a premium for Saudi oil that does not need to cross the strait, gains more weight. Iran's tactical failure at sea was simultaneously a Saudi commercial victory in energy markets. The board had been flipped, but there was a layer we had not yet touched, and it changes the nature of this analysis entirely. The Revolutionary Guard's naval swarm doctrine did not exist in isolation. It was part of an integrated area denial system that included anti-ship ballistic missiles, naval mines, and coastal cruise missiles. The fast boats were the most visible and most trained component of that system, but they were also the component Iran could risk in a show of force without compromising strategic assets of higher value. The question analysts at the Pentagon and the United States Naval Institute were formulating in the hours following the incident was not whether the boats had failed. That was self-evident. The question was whether Iran had deliberately sacrificed the most replaceable component of its naval arsenal to test the response times, engagement protocols, and specific weapons systems the American Navy would employ in a real confrontation. And here was what that layer revealed. If the attack was a deliberate test disguised as a provocation, then the tactical failure was irrelevant to Tehran, because the intelligence gathered on American defensive systems was worth infinitely more than 7 boats at $300,000 each. The total cost of the lost vessels, approximately $2,100,000, represented less than 0.1% of the Revolutionary Guard's estimated annual budget, which, according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, runs at around $2.3 billion. It was the price of intelligence that no spy satellite and no signals intercept could provide. Exactly how the United States Navy responds to a swarm attack under real conditions, with real crews operating real systems under real pressure. The historical analogy that captures this dynamic most precisely is not Operation Praying Mantis of 1988, when the American Navy destroyed half the Iranian fleet in a single day in the Persian Gulf, though that is the obvious comparison. It is the Winter War of 1939 between Finland and the Soviet Union. Stalin launched an overwhelmingly superior force against Finland and suffered humiliating losses in the opening weeks. More than 126,000 Soviet casualties against approximately 26,000 Finnish. The initial Soviet tactical defeat convinced the world that the Red Army was incompetent. But what the defeat actually did was provide Moscow with operational intelligence that allowed it to reorganize its entire military apparatus for the final offensive that forced Finland to surrender. The initial failure was the price of learning. The question no spokesperson was answering directly was this: was Tehran paying the same kind of tuition? Every additional day was one more day of pressure, on the countries most dependent on that resource. Countries that would in turn place on Washington a pressure the White House could not indefinitely ignore. The oil transiting Hormuz feeds refineries in Japan that process fuel for the third largest economy on the planet, supplies South Korean strategic reserves that sustain a semiconductor industry without which the global technology supply chain stops, and covers approximately 40% of China's oil imports, the world's largest energy buyer. Any sustained interruption of that flow would not be a regional crisis. It would be a convulsion in the global economy that would make the energy crisis of 2022, triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, look like a statistical hiccup. And the greatest paradox of the entire crisis resided precisely here. The weapon the regime had launched to wound its enemy was, in that moment, destroying its own source of income. Iran exports approximately 1,300,000 barrels of oil per day, the majority through routes that depend directly or indirectly on stability in the Persian Gulf. Every risk premium added to the Brent barrel by Iranian provocations in the Strait temporarily benefits exporters, but also accelerates buyers' search for alternatives that permanently bypass Hormuz. Saudi Arabia already had the pipeline. The United Arab Emirates were expanding the capacity of the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman outside the strait. And with each incident, the argument for the world to reduce its dependence on Hormuz grew stronger, which meant in the long run that Iran's primary geopolitical weapon lost value every time it was used. This is not merely a question of territory on a map. It is a question of who controls the energy arteries of the 21st century. And the outcome of this test will redraw the map of global power for decades. What those 90 seconds in the Strait of Hormuz demonstrated was that Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine, built over 20 years as the supreme guarantee that no foreign power would control the Gulf without paying an unacceptable price, may have reached its point of operational obsolescence, or the more unsettling alternative, may have fulfilled exactly the function Tehran intended, not as a weapon, but as a probe. The question that hung suspended over the Gulf waters after the wreckage sank was brutal in its simplicity. When Iran uses what it learned in those 90 seconds, will it come with speedboats, or with something the phalanx systems were never designed to intercept? The next chapter of this crisis was already being written, and the first lines would not be visible on the surface of the sea. If this analysis revealed a dimension of the Gulf confrontation that the headlines were not showing, share it with anyone following the Middle East crisis and leave a comment. Did Iran lose a battle, or did it buy a lesson?